All right, I think we will get started today. First of all, welcome to Flagship Friday's What If Innovator Forum. And we're happy to have you. We've had some really terrific talks, and we're finding some common themes with our innovators. And our innovator Did You Know fact for today is just to let you know that our marching band dash, the dash to create an innovative Iowa State music theme for the marching band that will be played at marching band events is we will be sharing that on this forum sometime in the next week or two. So you definitely want to hear that. And also C.S. Liu, who is with Pacific Agriscience, will be speaking next Thursday on how to innovate the future of agriculture. It will be co-sponsored by the Ag Entrepreneurship Initiative. And he will be speaking on topics as to what pressures drive innovation and innovating alternatives to conventional farming, and what's being done globally to address challenges to producing sustainable food. He said, think meat in a petri dish is one of the topics. How do we do those alternative protein sources? Interesting topic. So if you're interested on that, you can go to our website. I'm sure Nikaya will put that in the chat at some point. I do want to introduce our moderators today. We have Anna Luge from the College of Design. Hello, Anna. Welcome. Anna's doing a faculty and graduate student workshop today at 3 o'clock on entrepreneurship, innovating from within. And we have Nikaya Rucker. Nikaya is with the library. Hello, Nikaya. Do you want to say something about student putting questions in the chat?
I will. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us again. I'm really excited for today's session, and we invite you all to participate. We want to hear from you. Please don't wait until the end to add your comments or feedback or questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So as questions and ideas and thoughts come to you, please make sure to put it in the chat or the Q&A, excuse me, and we'll make sure to incorporate that throughout the conversation today.
Right. We have Abram Anders. Abram, I imagine you have quite the, as students go into finals week, you have quite the load ahead of you.
Yeah, I know it's a busy time for all of us in our program. But things are going smoothly, and we have great teams and support staff in place. So I think we're going to do well.
Yeah, so Abram, can you share what your official title is?
Yes, I'm an associate professor of English, and I direct the ISU Comm Foundation courses, which is our sequence of first and second year communication and writing courses. And many of the attendees here today may be joining us from classes where they're taking English 150 or 250.
Right. Abram has done a terrific job of spearheading our innovation programming and innovation education and infusing it into the curriculum, and actually did an experimental session on innovation as it relates to first year composition. Is that correct, Abram?
That is correct.
Yeah. So without any ado, let me introduce our speaker today, and not just our speaker, but honestly, one of the pillars that has really helped us launch innovation and innovation programming, along with Dennis Muhlenberg. He has been side by side with us as we've developed these programs, and is responsible for the initiation of our innovation fund for the students that are innovating. David Slump is the president of Global Market Strategy and Services at HARMAN, a wholly owned subsidiary of Samsung. He's responsible for leading the day-to-day operations and financial performance of HARMAN's Digital Transformation Services Division, which is the software and services business focused on smart infrastructure and connected lifestyle. He also holds responsibility for leading the corporate strategy and global market teams for HARMAN. And I think you'll find that strategy is what he is all about, and one of the things he does really well. And he has been phenomenal in advising our students. He is an ISU alum and connects regularly with the engineering department. We'll probably hear about that a little bit. And he has done 2 short circuits, one on customer marketing customer insights, as well as product management. And so I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about how important those things are as well. Abram, back to you.
Thank you, Karen. Well, David, we're so excited to speak with you. In our first set of time here, we'd love just to learn more about you and how you arrived at your current position. But maybe even before that, we'd just love for you to share with our audience members. Tell us a bit about HARMAN. Tell us a bit about your current role there and the kind of work you're doing.
Thanks, Abram. It's great to be here today. Well, most of you have probably heard about HARMAN through most of our consumer-facing brands. So JBL, I know Spencer's listening to us today through JBL and using an AKG microphone. I love hearing that. Infinity, Mark Levinson, depending on the price point or range, the foundation of the company was, and the innovator that started it was Sidney Harmon, and hence the namesake of Harman Kardon. And then he paired up and bought JBL. James B. Lansing actually put the first voice to a movie theater in Hollywood. So our pro business is headquartered out of Hollywood. But our largest business today, and the one that's not really branded, is we're an automotive electronics tier one. So we do the infotainment systems and the connectivity systems and the cloud software systems for automotive. And our newest business is the digital transformation services business, where we're helping other industries leverage AI, cloud computing, the power of connectivity. My role, to your second question, is never boring, which I like, because when I was a child, one of the things, a quote my father had given me once was, "Aim so high you'll never be bored." So anytime I feel like my calendar's too full or I got too much on my plate, I just remind myself I'm blessed, I'm not bored. So that's something that hits. But for the most part, I'm basically curating what HARMAN does outside of US and Europe. So most of my team and time and energy is in China, India, Korea, Japan, Brazil. I was on with the Brazil team here before this, basically trying to get us where we're not, which, in the essence is what strategy is all about. So hopefully that gives a short answer to your question, Abram.
Well, thanks, David. I do think that's a great answer. Well, tell us a little bit more about the journey. We know you're an alma mater from Iowa State alumni. What was it like to get to your current role? What were some of the key stages and steps along the way?
Well, maybe I'll just start, getting to Iowa State. That was a journey in and of itself. I didn't have parents that went to college or relatives. So as I was going through high school and learning about myself, as most people, one of the hardest things was, well, what do I want to be? And I didn't even know what an engineer was. I didn't know any engineers. So how do you figure out what you want to be when you don't know that stuff? Wasn't sure how that would work out. I just remember one day I had to make a decision, and I went to my high school calc teacher and asked for his advice. I said, "What's the hardest major I could pick?" And he said, "Electrical engineering." So I picked electrical engineering and decided to go to Iowa State in electrical engineering. I didn't know what an engineer was, but I liked challenge. I think I learned early about myself that I didn't want to be bored. I wanted a challenge. And I came to Iowa State. And during that time, I started to realize, wow, am I really an engineer? Am I really at heart an engineer? Because there were certain aspects of what I'll call a typical, prototypical engineer that I didn't see myself having. I'm very impatient, and engineers normally patient. But I liked problem solving. And as I went through that, I started to realize, wow, I like problem solving, and I like this idea of getting things changed and transformed. And I focused on engineering and areas that I could apply that critical thinking, if you will. And so I started I had to fund my own education. So that led me down a route of co-oping. And some of you have probably heard me talk before, but I think one of the best things about Iowa State is this hands-on experience that you can get. There's many ways to get it. Clubs, I'm active with Team Prism as one, but for me, it was a cooperative education. I went to Omaha and did that. And then when I was in school, I was working at the Electric Power Research Center. which is a really cool program that the College of Engineering has, and particularly the EE department, working and supporting utilities in the Midwest. And that helped me explore, if you will, what I liked and what I didn't like, and where I wanted to go. But I liked engineering enough to, like I said, problem solving and getting into new spaces, and power systems planning. I don't know how many engineers are in the room, but that felt like the right compromise of being an engineer. Where most people like the really hands-on engineering, I like the abstract math. And power systems planning is a lot of abstract math and finance. And I've always really enjoyed the intersection of economics, engineering, and policy, government policy. And if you spend time and energy, there's a lot of policy involved, automotive, a lot of policy involved. So I found that fascinating. And that's kind of led me to a journey into different jobs and careers along the way.
David, I might follow up with you on, those supplemental skills, engineers, the things that intrigued you, and how did you know where to look and how to identify some of those things? Like policy is typical. So I think when an engineer goes in engineering, we have things so scheduled, so many criteria. How did you find those experiences to know where to go and where to broaden your scope of engineering?
So by mistakes, okay? So, most engineers are curious by nature. You want to know how something works, you take things apart. For me, as I was trying to get something done, I would find barriers or roadblocks. And if getting money was a barrier, well, I better understand economics better. If policy was a barrier, I better understand how that works and how that influences. So it was more just trying to overcome barriers and figuring it out. And then during that course, I was like, wow, this is really cool stuff. I got to learn more. But the other, barrier, if you will, you always have these moments of, oh shit, for lack of a better word. And, growing up, Abram won't like this, but, I loved math. I loved physics. I didn't see the value of writing and English, history. Those classes I didn't appreciate in high school, okay, or even in college. Looking back, I think it's because anything that was taught with a regurgitative outcome, I'm not a good one to memorize things and do stuff. That's not how I learn. But anything where I can understand principles and apply principles, I was good at. So I had to also learn how I learned and turn things into things that I liked. So I was sitting in a meeting in Zurich, Switzerland. I moved to Switzerland. I had just been promoted head of sales and marketing. I was in over my head. I think I was like 32 years old, and I'm responsible for all global sales and marketing for $1 billion business. And I'm sitting in a meeting. This is pre-internet, to put context to it, because a lot of you in the audience probably don't know what the world was like pre-internet. And I'm sitting in a meeting, and they were talking about Abu Dhabi. And I remember sitting there thinking, uh-oh, is this a company? Is this a place? What is this? Okay. And I was very embarrassed. I didn't pay attention to geography. I didn't think, what did this stuff matter? And I went home and I said to my wife, hey, we got to go downtown Saturday to the bookstore. I got to buy an atlas. I got to start learning this stuff. I couldn't do this. So at that point, I realized, okay, I need to learn culture. Okay, whether it's policy, I'm switching gears a little, but the essence of your question, I think, is how do you learn these new things? So I thought, well, I'm not going to learn this overnight, so how am I going to learn this? So I've always done it by trying to grab hold of something I really like.
Yeah.
Well, you know this, I like wine. I enjoy wine. So I called my team up and I said, hey, as I land in a country, I want you to pick me up at the airport, the sales leader, and we're going to brief, for the customer meeting tomorrow. We're going to do this over a local dinner, local wine. And I want you to teach me about culture through wine. And that was the way it would stick in my head. I wasn't regurgitating things, I was experiencing it. And that's how I remember things. And of course, over that time, I've become have quite the repertoire of different lines. But I was able to learn culture at a time where, at ABB, we were early into these markets like China and India. We were at the forefront of decentralizing countries, and it was awesome.
Yeah, yeah. That is fabulous. I bet you our world and cultures people are just absolutely thrilled about that statement. But I really love how you have exposed, it's important for you to learn how you learn, because it sounds like then you have the tools you need in order to generate value. So fabulous story. Hey,
David, I'd love to hear a follow-up. One of the things that, and maybe this is not the case for you, but I'd be curious to hear you talk about it. One of the things that we often hear from people who are into STEM fields, they're into that abstract problem solving, and then they get promoted, and then they become a leader, and then maybe they find it challenging to learn the lessons of communicating and organizing teams rather than working solo on an individual problem. Could you maybe speak to those sets of challenges and how you encountered them and how you've been able to deal with them?
Sure. Let's start with communicating, then we'll come to leading, because I think communication is super important now. Okay, I really value it. For me, as an engineer, I was given, I tried to reinvent certain things, and to get buy-in for that, I had to communicate. So the first part of the real communication challenge for me wasn't in school. It was in the workplace, where I had to, I wanted to achieve an outcome, and I couldn't do it if I couldn't clearly articulate the problem and the benefits of the solution, both written and verbal. And then when I really learned it was when I went to get my MBA, because learning finance, marketing, all this stuff, that wasn't the hard part. The hard part of it, I was going part-time too, was being assigned 500 pages of reading a week and distilling a case study down to a 2-page answer. And to really be able to distill information and clearly articulate it in 2 pages, that was like a really huge benefit. Frankly, more important than all the book stuff I learned in my MBA. So, and then like most MBA students and engineers, we love our acronyms, right? And I remember early in some leadership roles at ABB, people would say, we don't understand you. And I think from that point on, I convinced myself, like, to lead thousands of people, you got to talk like you're in grade school. Forget fancy speak, forget everything. And simplicity and getting to the essence became kind of my goal. And particularly in a multicultural environment, I'd say I embrace speaking in broken English. In fact, my communications head knows that her writing for me has to not be perfect. It has to sound authentic. Because I blunder communications, but that's okay. Then people know it's coming from me. So communication, I think, is hugely important. And maybe the impatience of me is also the directness. Karen knows this. I don't really speak a lot. This is unusual. I'm kind of ad-libbing it. Normally I'd prepare and I'd be very crisp and to the point. Because you don't have a lot of time. I'm also a big believer that it takes an hour to prepare to speak clearly for 5 minutes, but most people think they can prepare for 5 minutes to speak for an hour. And then it's unclear and unfocused. So hopefully that hits the communications part. On the leadership part, I think we all go through those moments where, early in your career, it's all about what you can get done. And it's your outcome. And often type A personalities and perfectionists, learning to let go is the hardest thing you're going to go through. Okay, how do you delegate and allow all of that chaos to happen if you're not in control? And everybody, now that I mentor people that go through this journey, it's really about helping them figure out what's preventing them from letting go. And how are they going to get comfortable with it? Okay. And one analogy I'll use a lot, because I love sports, is, when you're the quarterback, you're the on-field coach, because you see the field. You you can see what's going on, but you don't see everything with the same perspective as the coach does on the sideline. But when you're a coach, you can see everything with perspective because you're not in that heat. Well, that's the difference between leading a team and kind of leading a business, is you have more perspective and you can let go, but you can see more clearly. So you have to embrace it as a positive outcome versus, hey, I lost control of what can be done. Hopefully I'm making sense here in that analogy, but that's important. And for me personally, I was a very type A perfectionist. Okay, so I know what it took for me to let go and to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So that's a phrase that's super important for a leader, but also in innovation, because innovation is all about risk. So how are you comfortable taking risks if you're a perfectionist? All right, you have to become comfortable being uncomfortable, and maybe that'll be a follow-up question, because I think there's things you can do to improve on that. But hopefully that answered that question for you.
Good. Yeah, I'd like to follow up on the letting go comment too, because our speaker last week also commented, Bill Christensen, on Steve Jobs was saying 1,000 things you say no to, and innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. And it's very challenging, especially as a young person, and you see opportunity and you don't want to miss something. So what are your criteria for things you let go?
Yeah, I probably don't think of it in terms of the criteria of what I let go. I focus on the desired outcome. And, I heard Dennis's thing the other day too, and I thought he and I probably share a lot of similar thoughts. One was, remember, he said it's mission. So I always think of outcome. My team teases me that I use certain phrases over and over again. One phrase is start with the end in mind. Okay? It's a project principle, but start with the end in mind. What outcome do I want? Now, you want to be focused on an outcome, and you want to be agile in how you get there. So the way I say no is I'm being agile to how I get to the outcome, but if I don't feel that thing will lead me to the outcome, I say no. So the criteria is somewhat subjective in confidence, but it's my experience and gut, and how you use your gut is another learning without being overconfident. Is that going to get to the outcome, or is it going to distract me? And I think the other criteria, if you want, Karen, is like we all have 24 hours in a day. It doesn't matter if you're a solo engineer or a CEO of a business, you only have 24 hours in the day. So how you choose to say no is really a reflection of where you prioritize your time. So it's more what you're saying yes to and letting go of everything else. And being comfortable with that, because you know what your outcome is. Are you muted?
No, that's Karen, were you trying to talk? Please go ahead. Okay, thank you. You've already mentioned a few, but another topic we'd love to hear from you is if you could talk us through maybe a major challenge you faced along the way and how you overcame or addressed it. You already talked about at least two. I wonder if there's a third that might come to mind.
Yeah, there's plenty of challenges along the way. I think we talked about the cultural challenge I went through. We talked about, learning to let go and lead. How to take risks is another area. And if you're a perfectionist, I would say you're naturally risk averse, okay? Because you want things to be perfect. And I think, the other pivot students have to make is, you're in school to get an A, but when you're in work, getting an A might hold you back, okay? Because nobody's that good. So, one of the things I've had to work on over the years is how do I learn to take risks? And how do I take my perfectionism desire and make it a attribute to risk management? So, for me, what I've learned to do is break every risk. Let's talk about the risks. So those who work for me know, I'm relentless in the op reviews that you identify risk and talk about mitigating actions. So it's not that it's almost admitting that there are risks, Don't assume there's no risks. Embrace that there's risks. Now let's clearly lay them out and put mitigating actions plan in place. And that's how I became comfortable with taking risks. And then if I use an analogy, partly why I love mountain biking is it forces me to take risks and in a different way, but it also taught me the importance of progression. So you don't take a huge risk all at once. You work up to a big risk through progression. Well, it's no different than in business. And so what's the equivalent of progression? It's testing. How do you test things? And there's engineering tests, there's business tests, there's due diligence tests. There's all kinds of various ways to test. But in the essence, all you're trying to do is identify risks and break it down and take mitigating actions. And for me, that's probably been and continues to be the most important thing to keep balance on, because most people want to ignore the risks, hope for the best, but the saying, hope for the best, but plan for the worst.
I have a follow-up question. So what would you say to our graduating seniors who are entering into their profession, they're ready to go, and they want to take the risk, but they also understand that they're new to the profession, they're new to the business, they're still getting to learn senior leadership and their vision and just how things work in company culture, right? So how would you suggest that they go about taking risk and possibly influencing, especially at such a young age, and as someone who's kind of wet behind the ears sometimes?
Yeah, I think, well, the first recommendation I would give is, start with building your brand and do a good job, okay? The best way to get recognized is just do great work, okay? And don't extend too far too fast, because, people will see that as a lack of focus, or maybe trying too much for personal recognition versus a team result. So getting recognized for being really good at what you do sounds straightforward, but on average, more people don't do it than do. So, therefore, I'd reiterate that that's important. And then, the second part, and I don't know how to say other than learn the sixth sense of knowing when it's appropriate to put something out there and when it's not. You might be invited to a meeting and you get all prepared and you say, I'm going to put it out there in this meeting because it's the right audience and it's the right feeling. But then you got to watch the vibe of the meeting, the flow, and know, wow, is this the right time or not? Okay, don't ruin an opportunity by missing it, but also don't ruin an opportunity by going in with a plan and not adapting to what's going on in the environment. And that comes with time and a skill that's learned, but often I see younger people try too hard. I'm also very sensitive to it because, I've hired a couple recent grads from Iowa State into our LEAP program, and normally I wouldn't deal with a fresh out from college in my role, but I will, give them time and attention to meetings, and then I have to be careful. Wow, if I overdo it, if I give them too much of a platform and they stumble, I've actually hurt them. So, but what's fun is we'll go have a beer and I'll talk to them ahead of time. Hey, watch the room, watch the vibe, don't do this. Getting a mentor early in your career is hugely important. And a mentor, you could say, is, an ultimate mentor is a great advocate. But at first, all you need is a coach and a sounding board and somebody who's willing to be honest with you and give you reflective feedback. So that's really important. And then, and once you're doing a good job, like for me, I know I pissed off some of my peers early in my career because I was promoting change and things, but I was able to get by with it because the change benefited everybody, as opposed to like I was trying to get ahead. And how you package that and think about it was really really important. And then how you include some and how you bring them along. Yeah. But it's particularly harder for engineers because it's a unique area to be in.
So I want to follow up on that, David, because I think you're absolutely right. And particularly some of our students that have been very internally focused on their education, their path. They've been told to focus, focus, focus. Make sure you perform, make sure it's about your performance, you're competing. And now you're right. I loved how you used the word brand. Brand is absolutely appropriate. What are the elements of a brand of a human performing well in the industry? What elements should students be focused on as they build a brand to be well known as a contributor, as a performer? What are the toolkit? What's my brand toolkit?
Yeah, I think it's important that you build your own brand. I mean, it's no different than, Andy mentioned this last night. It's easy to go to China and go into those marts and slap your brand on somebody else's product. So, one of the things I look for when I'm interviewing people in the end is authenticity. Okay. Is that brand who they really are? Now, that doesn't mean you don't evolve who you are. You don't add features and you don't build, but it's really now you. You're not faking it. So as you build your brand, you got to figure out who you really are today, and then what do you want to be, but how do you get there through practice, through making it real, to making it part of who you are so it's authentic. So that would be my generic answer. Now, if I get specific, like what do I look for when I'm looking for high performers and talent? I actually still use 4 of the E's that Jack Welch taught when we were at GE, but I've added 4 E's, okay? Because I didn't think the 4 were enough. So, if any of you have read Jack's book, but they're really important skills that I use today still in interviewing. Number 1 is energy. This is a long work journey. You're working a career, you're working hard jobs, you've got to have that energy inside. But what I'm really looking for is it passion? Do they really relate to the mission? Okay, or do they just want a job? So, it's really important that they have energy. Second attribute is that's not enough if you can't energize others, which is why I'm looking for the passion, because people who are authentic and have passion energize others. Okay, those are 2 important attributes. Third, GE called edge, but for lack of a better word, it's decisiveness. I'm looking for, are they decisive? Can they make decisions with enough information in a timely manner? Okay, are they decisive? And then fourth is, are they results oriented? Do they execute? The 4th E is, do they execute? I.e., are they results oriented? Do they get stuff done? Early at my point in the career, it's all in the financial numbers, but early in your career, it's your say do and do you get stuff done? Can you be counted on to get it done on time? Now, those were the 4 GEEs. I added 4 because I didn't think they were sufficient. Often you'd find people who were really really good at edge were not inclusive enough, so I added empathy. Do they have that right inclusive behavior? Can they listen in stereo? Can they listen with their eyes, not just their ears? Those are really important attributes to test. Do they have expertise? I'm not a believer anymore of the general manager. I believe you become a general manager through multiple buildings of expertise. Okay, so in that particular area, do they have expertise? Because with expertise comes confidence, and that's important. 7 was external focus. It's so easy for any role, not just, you'd expect marketing or sales to be external focus, but engineers, their competition, but external focus, trends. And then finally, and really important for my role, particularly when I'm hiring people in China and India and Russia, is ethics. Okay. I spend half an interview sometimes on that topic and they don't even know it. Because if you mess up on that, you don't get a second chance. So those are those 8 attributes that I'm looking for in a leader. Why do I share that with you as a college graduate or soon to be? Is those are the things you might think about building over time. You're not going to become great at all of them all at once. But in any given job, you could say, wow, this job allows me to build expertise, or it allows me to learn how to apply external focus skills. Okay. your first job out of college, your integrity is just your say-do. But when you're working in different markets or you're dealing with different government officials, trades, you'd be shocked how often you can be tested in different problems. So those are hopefully answers the question.
No, I think Jan, this is exactly what our students are asking. We had Manny approach us. He was the inspiration for this. I keep bringing his name up, but he said, I know what to do technically. Tell me how to behave. So your point about how do I practice? And I'm wondering if you might dig a little further on ethics. What does that look like as a practicing professional? I'm really curious as to how you explore that with someone.
Yeah. Well, the how I explore it at a leadership level is I ask, give me examples of issues you faced and how you dealt with it. And so the first red flag for me is anybody who says they haven't dealt with any, they're lying. Okay? Because if you've been in business long enough and you haven't dealt with any, then you're not paying attention, which is a risk in of itself, or you're not being honest. Okay? And then I listen to, there's all kinds of various forms. I listen to, it's less important the story they're telling. I'm listening for how did they deal with it? How did they address it? How did they involve others in it? And do I have confidence that it's authentic again? So, we're fortunate that we have less issues in Russia and China and India than we do in the US. But yet, when we were a public company before Samsung bought us, all of our board members were like, oh, you're in Russia, oh, you're in India. They would overgeneralize these are high-risk countries. But for us, because we pay so much attention to the leadership level on this topic, once you get the right country manager, the rest of it takes care of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really great, really helpful. Abram or Nakaya, do you have questions?
Yeah, I want to make sure that we have a little time to talk about innovation within the industry right now. You referenced some of the big things that HARMAN's doing as they grow and adapt. I would love to hear you talk about the trends and the growth areas. And then for me, that idea of really focusing on mitigating risk and exploring risk was so fascinating. I don't know if maybe you might work a little bit of that in as well.
Sure. Okay, so look, personal development. The other part, I said it's important to learn risk. The other part for me is, look, I'm not a natural creative type, okay? Meaning, putting paint on a canvas wasn't something that excites me, or playing music, but creativity is super important, okay? So, again, forcing yourself to do some things that you're uncomfortable with, you have to do different exercises in creativity. So for me, one of the big things to do that was I joined Singularity University. And it was fascinating because it was really, at the time, teaching me the importance to pay attention to, the vital few technology trends and pay attention to the vital few societal problems and look at those intersections and then look at your mission and where you have permission to play. Okay, and how can you innovate in that space? So, when you think about some of the industry trends like 3D printing, cybersecurity, AI, robotics, these trends fundamentally, you got to pick a few. Which ones matter most to you? For us, we're really into connectivity. So for us right now, that means 5G and the application of 5G, cloud and the application of cloud, and cybersecurity, by the way. I'm hugely a fan of what Iowa State's doing in that area because it's going to be pivotal for the future. So then we look at what does that mean on the societal problems, and mobility is an opportunity and a problem today. Okay, and we're in the transportation business, but I find really fascinating healthcare and how these trends apply to health. So we were approached by a company who is a drug company, and they wanted to evolve to therapeutics beyond drugs. And the specific pilot was autism. So I found this quite fascinating, and we dug deeper and turned a business into this. But I think it'll be a good way to answer the question. So today, if a child's autistic, right? They might be going to a therapist and being coached how to look people in the eye, how to interact, how to not behave, but how to engage in society in a better way than they would naturally do on their own. But they have to go home and practice these skills, right? Just like if we're going to, I'm in the middle of PT on my shoulder, I got to go home and do the PT or I don't get better. And then the therapist comes back, hopes for it. And it's a really slow, long, drawn out journey. There isn't a lot of data if you're an engineer. So now imagine that you could have a system where the patient at home gets to play a game in AR, wears a headset, and interacts through gamification with these things, so they do it more often and they're learning more frequently. Now imagine that while they're doing that, all of that and the relevant data is going to the cloud so that the therapist can see what's working, what's not for the next session. That is the first treatment we're deploying, and it will be medically certified and it will be prescribed as a digital treatment. The next one is oncology we're working on. So, if a patient's going through chemo at home, there's patterns and different data that would suggest it's working or not, lots of symptoms. But it's up to whether or not the patient calls the doctor. Is it just a symptom of a side effect, or is it an alarming early indicator? And again, imagining through digital health and connectivity and the cloud that these patterns and these relationships over a bigger population could be turned into data to prevent bad symptoms from occurring or prevent calls to the emergency room that were unnecessary. So I'm really a fan of taking AR technology, cloud, connectivity, and applying it to health. And digital health, I think, is still at its infancy as one example. Did I get to the whole?
I just want to say that that's incredibly fascinating. And what really intrigues me about it, this relates really strongly to the future of learning, because one of the two things we're looking at that are very similar is how do you establish that feedback loop of engagement to create a positive habit with the learner, and then also a feedback loop of visibility that allows an educator or a coach, a facilitator, to intervene in an appropriate way. And I think one of the things that's fascinating is the challenge of using new methods like AR to get into places, to get information that's more valuable than a multiple choice quiz or a questionnaire, something that comes too late or is too superficial or doesn't give you the information you really need to intervene effectively. So I have to say that's just incredible.
Yeah, the future of education is a subspace we're looking at, actually. I'm intrigued by it. And because, look, this COVID world probably is stress testing it, but when I was in school, you had to figure out, okay, do you learn by going to class and taking notes? Do you learn by doing? Do you learn by reading? I mean, we all learn a little differently. I learned how I learned through my wife. She was at Iowa State in education, and I was learning the way teachers taught me to learn. I wasn't getting the best grades. And when she says, no, that's not how you learn, this is how you learn, boom, my grades went up. So I think that's important. So today, my daughter, she's in vet school, and she learns through reading, taking notes, doing this stuff. So this remote learning right now isn't affecting her much. It's not bothering her much. My son, he's more the social guy. He can't stand not being in a classroom and having that pressure to need to perform. And therefore, he's really struggling with this home. So now if we take those extremes and say digital education shouldn't be an either or, it's how do we apply the various spectrum of tools so that students can figure out which element of those best suits how they learn and create a mix. So it becomes a product mix, not a you must learn by going to the classroom. And I think that's where technology and hopefully the negative of this COVID could turn into the positive is we're learning how to deploy new tools and people are learning how to figure out which one works best for them.
David, I want to follow up on that because I love how you talk about the student owning their education as a product. I think that's a really important perspective because I think students participate in education as though it's happening to them. And especially when we're building future innovators, right? For them to deploy that education for a very specific purpose is really important. How would you advise from a product management standpoint, which I think is a fabulous way to talk about education, how would you advise our students to treat their education as a product? How do they customize that product for them?
Yeah.
I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I wasn't going to give you the easy questions.
No, I think, maybe I'll just reflect. I kind of think about there's two phases of college, okay? Maybe there's more, but I'll oversimplify and say phase one, i.e. your kind of freshman, sophomore year, I don't think you're focused on the outcome, as I mentioned earlier. I think you're focused on the experience, okay? At least I was. It's fun. There's a lot to do, and you're there to learn. But yeah, you're showing up because you have to, not necessarily because you really know what you want, okay? Then there's the second phase. And for me, the switch was when I went and got my co-op and I realized, holy cow, I'm going to have to get a job and I'm going to have to perform well to make an income. Then when I went back to school, I had a purpose. I had an outcome now. And for me, because I'm very results oriented, once I had the outcome, I could control how I wanted to learn and how I wanted to engage in my educational experience. So I guess what I'm getting at is step one then has to start with, do you know why you're there in the first place? Or are you there because it's expected? And do you know what outcome you want? And it's okay if you don't in the early days, but if you're a graduating senior and you don't, it's going to show up in the interview. A good assessor is gonna smell it. And so I think you got to understand your purpose, and hopefully your purpose is more than just I want a job, okay? Because you're going to hate your career if you just want a job, okay? You've got to figure out how to find that intersection of your passion and somebody who can extract value out of your passion. So if you don't know your passion, if you don't know the skills needed for that passion, I would start there.
And David, I actually have a question for you. And this is something that you touched on earlier. You talked about creativity, right? And you talked about as an engineer, how that's something that you kind of had to learn and get into. It wasn't your natural thing, right? So what would you say to students who are also saying creativity is not my thing, maybe innovation, but I'm not the one out there painting, I'm not good at designing? What would you say to those folks who don't think that it's for them?
Put yourself out of your comfort zone, okay? If you don't understand how to do something, go do it. I didn't understand culture, I embraced culture. I didn't understand creativity, I embraced creativity. So I think it starts with just go do it. So my son, I'll give an example. My son wants to be an innovator in marketing and everything. He doesn't want to be an engineer. I took him to the solar team at an Iowa State visit, the PRISM team, and I said, look, you're going to have to find a team like this. Because if you don't know how to relate with engineers in college, if you think you can just hang out with the non-engineers and then be an innovation out of college, you're kidding yourself. So put yourself in a club that has nothing to do with what you like because it serves the ultimate outcome. The simple answer, Nakaya, is just put yourself in a situation that helps you grow and become comfortable with being uncomfortable, because you're going to be uncomfortable for 40 years if you want a successful career.
I love those comments, David. There's research done by folks out of Stanford saying, we often tell people find your passion, and they suggest, no, you should develop your passion. You don't. Some people, yes, they just are born, they know what they want to do, rare folks. But for most of us, we develop it. And in many cases, some of those things we're most passionate about are the acquired tastes, because we had to invest a lot of energy and time in discovering what was valuable, worthwhile, and gaining the competency that makes it enjoyable to engage with. You talked about one area that you kind of pushed yourself into at the mountain biking. Maybe you could talk about some other areas, maybe even some expertise that you're working on picking up now. Maybe it's an area where I better learn something about this that you're working on right now.
Right now, I would say the thing keeping me up at night, and man, this is probably a dangerous territory depending on people, but it's the China-U.S. trade issue. Okay, I'm spending a lot of time on that. Back to the policy, because it's significant outcome for our business. Okay, I mean, it's not a personal hobby; it's business. You know, it started for me personally. Oh, what was it now? 3 years ago. We put the telematics, which is, you know, the 4G connectivity box. So think of it as the cell phone of the car so that your connected car can communicate. We do almost 100% of Mercedes-Benz cars. Okay. And before we disrupted the industry, 95% of modems were Qualcomm. And some of you, you know, the industry, Qualcomm kind of is chastised for having a monopoly in the space. We went and disrupted it by partnering with Huawei. Okay, and this was probably 6 years ago. So the end result is 95% of production of Daimlers have a Huawei modem. So when the trade tariff came up, the unintended consequence of, and don't take this as politics, please, but by Trump putting that barrier in place to create jobs, was a lack of complete understanding of how supply chains and policies trickle through and technology. Because in this particular case, the three most important technology elements in the Huawei module were two US companies in what's called an RF front end, Qorvo and Skyworks, and Micron memory. So now 3 US companies could not export to Huawei. Okay, so that was hurting them. And then, so what does Huawei do? Well, we'll just insource this. So now we're actually encouraging them to compete. And then the reason it took me a daily call with Daimler all the way up to the CEO was because we were going to shut down all production of Mercedes cars over this topic. Okay, so now wind the clock forward where we are. You know, the headline news is this is a trade issue, but it's not. It's a cybersecurity issue. And what you're seeing develop is a trust this, trust that. But it starts with trust where you burn in the software to the processors, trust how the manufacturing process is done, how data is collected, and this distrust of supply chain. So we have said as a company, regardless of who wins the White House, of course this was before this week, regardless of who wins the White House, this topic's not going away. That's our fundamental premise of our strategy, okay? Which means globalization is going to take a twist, which means who we partner with, how we set up our supply chains, how we innovate China for China is going to be radically different going forward. And what I don't understand right now is we have a partnership with Huawei, we have a partnership with Tencent, we have a partnership with Alibaba. Can I even do that as a U.S. public company? Do I need to set up a joint venture? Do I need to change? We have 1,000 innovators in Shenzhen. So I don't know what I don't know right now, Abram, on this topic, and it's scaring the hell out of me because if I wake up one day and they say, you can't do business here, we've got over $1 billion of revenue in China. But it's more than that. We could shut down production of other companies. So that's where trying to find this intersection of policy and business and technology, it's knowing where we have the right to innovate, not how to innovate.
David, I think it's interesting for our students to hear you struggle and hear you work through things. So I think one of the assumptions is when you get to your phase, you just go out and find it and build it. But I would guess, who do you talk to? What do you do when you are trying to figure something out? And what's your strategy for going to find more expertise, more opportunity, more like working through this discomfort? What do you do?
Yeah, so, well, two things. So number one, like if you told me, I have a really good friend that owns this e-shop in Chicago from when I was living in Chicago, and we were hiking in the Alps one day, and he was talking about how they have their house, they have their shop, and he's set for life. And I remember telling him, I said, Jim, my gosh, if I knew what the rest of my life would bring, let alone the next 3 years, shoot me now. Okay, I can't handle that amount of clarity. So I think the first thing I realized about myself is where some people need that stability and clarity, I don't like it. And I even had a CEO once of a company tell me in my performance review, David, you abhor the status quo. Okay. So because of that, Karen, all the problems in Harman are thrown on my lap.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So the first thing is I don't get to wake up every day and say, wow, I get to do the same thing I did yesterday. I'm throwing the difficult stuff because I like it. Okay. So the first thing I realized is as hard as it is, I like solving problems.
Yeah.
I still to this day like solving problems. It's just the type of problem has evolved. Okay. So how do I get comfortable with it? I've been doing it. What do I do to learn? Network. You know, the days of reading to learn, I think, are a bit outdated. I read, but I don't read anything that could be bound in a book because it's already past due. I have to read blogs. I have to read, more lively, real-time stuff. So that's one. But talk to people. I joined industry groups. I've been a part of World 50, so this is like a select group of companies that we can talk confidentially and benchmark on topics. You have to integrate. So, luckily in my role, I can call any suppliers, leadership team, or any customers and just say, hey, how are you thinking about this? But if I go back in my career, I remember a mentor who once said, when in doubt, ask the customer. And that stuck with me. So when I was given assignments that I had no clue how to do, a lot of my colleagues would go sit down, draw out a plan, create a PowerPoint, do all this stuff. And my first thing was call a customer and say, how would you deal with this issue? Will you help me with this issue? And I never was told no, not once. So, I think networking is huge. And in order for you to do that, you got to be willing to return the favor. So when people call me, I hardly ever say no, unless it's a conflict of interest. And then you just got to be honest and tell them why. And then build a team. So once, what I do is I spend most of my time figuring out what should that outcome goal be. And then I don't spend much time in the how. That's where I let the team loose. Okay. And you heard Andy yesterday also say, let the team loose. I let a lot of agility in the guardrails. I don't define the how, but I have to spend most of my time on the desired outcome, because if you get that wrong, if you don't know where the puck you're skating to is, then you're going to end up in the wrong direction. So, my most recent boss mantra was always speed, speed, speed. Okay. In fact, that's how we met. I was leading a project speed at ABB. But I remember one day thinking about it from a physics, speed without direction is not velocity.
Yeah.
So it's the direction that enables the speed. That would be the key.
Great.
So David,
Sorry, I have a whole bunch of questions that I'd love to follow up with you on. One, I'd just really love to go back to, and I don't want to steer this too much back to communication, but I have to ask, you talked about that moment you're going into Daimler and you're saying, we're going to shut down your production over this trade tariff issue. And, I get the sense from you, and you've kind of said you can kind of tolerate some of this chaos in a way that maybe not all people can. What's your strategy when you're going in to speak to stakeholders, when you maybe have competing interests, when maybe there's a crisis and maybe the person on the other side of the chair is a little more nervous than even you are? What are you thinking about? What are your touchstones for that kind of conversation?
Yeah. I always listen to our sales leaders who, in the end, their reputation is more at stake than mine when they call me in to help at a customer, right? And I've had to deal with Subaru crisis and others. And one of them said, David, I love how you're straight down the middle. So in essence, I just put it on the table to build confidence. So instead of tiptoeing around the problem and making it smell better. I just come in and say, here's the problem, okay? And here's our plan and how we're going to address it. Love your thoughts and help on that plan. And again, they just love that because most people aren't doing it. It's not sophisticated. It's super clear about what the problem is, what outcome is prevented because of the problem. So in this case, we're shutting down vehicles. And normally customers really embrace you if you're like, wow, I'm glad you're telling me, other than we see that you've stopped production and now we got to call you and ask what's going on. The Japanese have an expression called bad news first. And you know, you don't want to overgeneralize cultures or anything, but there are reasons people overgeneralize because there's patterns and behaviors. And the big three in Detroit behave very differently than the three in Germany, who behave very differently than the Japanese OEMs. And one thing that I like about the quality culture of the Japanese OEMs is that bad news first comes from a quality culture. If you don't know the problem, you can't get to the root cause and you can't develop a corrective action plan. So that's kind of the engineering. You know, so it's really interesting, but I think that's the simple answer. Just go in, don't be afraid to be honest. I mean, in the end, they're gonna know. You know, the old saying, you know, perception is reality in the short term, but performance is reality in the long term. And I believe that's also about your personal brand. You know, it goes back to that, I said be authentic, because you can fake perception, but performance is the truth in the end.
That's great. I love that. And, you know, one of the things that's beautiful about that as well is when a tried and true strategy for persuading people is to help them, invite them in, help them, let them be part of the solution and shaping it. If I could ask one more follow-up on some of the comments you were just giving. You talked about the fact that when you're working with your teams, you often leave the how up to them, and you really work on defining the goal. And to pick up on a theme you said earlier, I think one of the things that happens to leaders who are perfectionists is they may feel like they have to spell out all the steps before they're confident in having a why or a purpose or a goal. Do you have any ways of thinking about that for yourself where you're able to be precise with your confidence in your goal, but you're able to shed some pieces of the problem solving?
Yeah, well, first off, so I'll define a goal, but the first thing I'll ask people is if they understand the goal, do they relate to the goal, because you want to help them shape it and own it. And, you know, and you also have to trust that even if they're debating it and you're afraid they're going to take it in another direction, that it'll come back if you have the right people in the room. You know, and it's more important that you trust the journey, because that's how they get the buy-in, okay? Because if they don't have clarity to the goal, and clarity comes from really understanding it, then the execution's already flawed, all right? How did I learn to just trust the chaos of the journey? I think that comes from that, back to where I said you got to learn how to be the coach and then ultimately to multiply yourself. If you have to do each thing, you only have 24 hours in the day, so there's only so many things you can do. But if you can learn to enable others to do it and just know when to ask the right questions or know when things are a little going off astray, then you can let go. But letting go doesn't mean walking away. You know, I monitor things, relentless follow-up. You know, often people will tell me, David, you were the hardest person to work for in my life, but I learned the most, you know? And I'll ask them, well, what do you mean by that? And it's because I'm relentless on the follow-up and I'm relentless on the goal, but I'm enabling in terms of helping them develop to reach it. And that's just ultimately, if I catch myself in a bad behavior, like starting to do, I just say, oops, I'm Belichick, I'm not Brady. I can't throw the ball. I can only call the play, you know?
Thank you. That's such a great answer. This is really inspiring for me, not only as a scholar of communication, but, you know, thinking about how you can apply it for yourself. I think Nakaya had a question next. Nakaya, would you like to ask that?
Sure, yeah. So I have a question about, again, something that you said a little bit earlier. You said that you like challenges and that you like problem solving and you like getting things changed. And so my question for you is, there's this theme throughout your career. You like the hard things. You like going after the difficult, challenging problems. But with that in mind, how do you stay energized? Because I know that you like it, which is great. But how do you go in every day with the mindset of, all right, I'm tackling a new problem? How do you not get exhausted? Like mentally, how do you stay on?
Yeah, great question. So I learned how to turn off and I learned how to recharge. So for me, everybody strikes for balance a different way. And mountain biking is one of mine, okay? Because, I used to road bike more because it was exercise. But what I liked about mountain biking is focus. But the focus now is on something of not thinking. Okay, so I'm thinking all day long, but I'm not using my body. Mountain biking is almost not thinking and using your body. And it's being so reactionary because you're in a zone, and that's relaxing to me. I can just go do an hour of that and feel completely recharged. And if I'm getting overwhelmed and stressed, it's even more important I go do that, And I'll tell the same to the team. If I see some people burning out, I'm like, get out of here. Go do whatever you go do, okay? You've got to recharge. You got to think about this as a marathon, not a sprint, right? Other ways I recharge, great, if I'm out traveling, because, pre-COVID, I was traveling 3 weeks of the month, often international, sometimes 300,000 miles a year. People would look at me like, that's got to be exhausting. Well, it is, but I got joy out of that. Okay, tonight we got this dinner and we got this wine, okay, and we got this team. We have this customer. That was a recharge for me. Might not be for others. You are on. If you have a customer or something, you're on, but it's a different type of on. Okay, it's a refreshing on. And then, family. I have 2 kids that I love going to their games. I love doing their stuff, and that's a recharge. And I've never felt that I had any regrets out of how that balance worked. It just kind of worked, and that kept me feeling like it was okay. If that answers the question, Nakaya?
Yeah. So David, I want to follow up on too, the other component of that, because being so outcome driven, and when you're in relationship, and probably most of the people you have relationship, I would imagine, are people related to you in the business and or have some sort of business affinity, and being outcome driven. How do you focus on creating relationships with people where you're sort of not commoditizing them and you're really creating, to your word, authentic relationship as a foundation that isn't focused on, okay, there's a business purpose to this?
Right. So one thing I do when I'm onboarding new people who work for me, because I know I can be hard. First off, I know I'm hard to get to know, okay? Because if you're driven like that, you can. So you got to create these spaces where it's not a review. If the only interactions you're having with one of your direct reports is the op review, well, you've basically failed, okay? Because an op review, they're going to feel like is a performance review. So I would often say, travel with me. Let's go see some customers together. Let's go do this. Why? Because during that travel and downtime, there's lots of small talk. You're waiting in a queue at the airport. You're getting to know each other. You're having dinner. You're getting to know each other. So then people would finally, you have this ability to understand each other, okay? And then, you adapt to people's styles. Just like most coach, if you read a lot about coaches, they adapt to different players. I adapt to different styles. So if I have one person that's like, I know they're active when they're on the road, we'll go run together in the morning and we'll talk and run. Now, I hate running. I only run so I can ride, but I run because it's time with them. I have others who, particularly when I was leading procurement, some real big Scotch fans. Well, I was never a big Scotch fan, but now I know a lot about Scotch. I've learned to like Scotch because that was their thing, and it got them talking, it got me talking. So, you have to find a way to have that balance even in the work, because they have to feel they can be authentic with you. They have to feel they can trust being vulnerable. And if they don't have that trust that they can be vulnerable, it's okay. And then, you know, when you're back in the op review, now if you're so outcome focused, it can almost become dehumanizing. But if they know, no, you care about them, but you care about the result, they don't commingle the two. They're separate.
Yeah, that's a really good assessment. You don't commingle the two. So, because I think the temptation, you know, I'm probably more driven like you, is to make 2 for 1, right? To count 2 for 1, to make relationship and outcome and business all, particularly in people that are driven. So I think that that's a really interesting observation.
How you ask questions, by the way, is equally important as a leader. If you ask, why did you do that? You put somebody on the defense. If you said, why are the numbers like that? You allow process and other things.
That's a fabulous. So what other, this is a really good, and back to communication. I think it's interesting that we started with how much you hate communication. And yet, allora, as the Italians say, here we are, right? Communication. So I want, because one of the things our students struggle with is we're asking them, especially in our Innovation Fellows program, to have relationships with industry stakeholders. And our innovators have indicated asking questions is really important. And students have come to us and said, we don't know really what questions to ask that aren't about product. What questions should students be asking? What questions do you ask that lead to capacity building?
So, you know, the first thing I want to hit at is like, let's come back to the definition of innovation first, because look, if we associate innovation to products, we've already been too narrow.
Absolutely.
Okay? So look, product innovation's fun, service innovation's fun, business model innovation's fun, okay? So I think, you know, the first thing I'd say is like, think widely about innovation. You know, if you ask me what it is, it's just about doing things differently and for a better outcome, okay? And that could be doing a different product for a better outcome. It could be about a different business. It could be about a different business process. I mean, I've spent half my career on process innovation.
Yeah.
And yet most people wouldn't call that innovation. But if it's a doing things a different way for a better outcome, that's innovation. So I sidetracked on your question, so I kind of forgot the question. But you know, you got what is innovation is really important, because that's just the stage of how do you learn. So at any point in your career, you can innovate. You don't have to be on a product team to innovate.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was the question for our students, advice for our students. What questions do you ask, and how do you ask them?
I see. So the most basic way in my head, I'll start with what I'm thinking, not what I'm asking, is to learn anything new. I'm always going through the current state, desired state, execution path in my head. Okay. So, you know, often all my questions will always start with, do I understand the current state? Okay, so it's always understanding something. You know, why is the process this way? What does it result in? What works? Or why is the product this way? Or what does the consumer want? But often, you know, there isn't a cookie cutter recipe of questions, but there is, you know, all my questions are targeted to, do I understand the current situation? Do I understand why it's working, why it's not, you know, why is it good or not? But do I understand the good current state? Then I go to what I told you, like in the China analogy. Do I understand my desired state? Do I know where I want to go and why?
Yeah.
And do I understand why, right? So I'll ask questions around that. I'll test it. And then the execution class is kind of breaking it down. And then often, you know, for the business size we're at, I have to think 3 years. So I'll ask about, like, hey, if it takes us 3 years to get something, personally, I don't believe you can fix anything in 12 months. You can only start to see the foundations of change. But in 3 years, you should start to see it. But you got to break the 3 years down into 1 year milestones. And then I break the first year into quarterly milestones. And I break the first quarter into weekly milestones. Now, I don't do it. I ask the team. But then I have trust in the execution. I know what I'm following up for.
Yeah.
Plus, allows, in a way, you're building in tests, because now you're seeing, hey, Are we
Right.
testing? Are we adapting? Are we being agile? So all my questions in quote innovating or problem solving or being creative tend to always have come from that framework.
This gives our students fabulous, so the current state, desired state, execution state, these are 3 levels and phases of questioning. It really gives, one of the things that I really admire about how you're approaching this is you're making transparent, again, how you learn, how to, the pathway for learning. This is really gold for our students. Nakaya, do we have more questions?
I don't think we have any more questions in the chat right now, but I do have another question. So I feel like engineers are usually stereotyped as less people focused and more focused on outcome and products, which is fantastic. But as a leader, how do you focus on people and what insights do you have about driving them to perform and driving them to perform how you need them to perform, how you expect them to contribute to the team? Because I think it can be challenging at times.
Yeah, yes, it can. But, finding their passion, right, and how to align their inside passion to the business outcome. When I mentioned traveling with people, that's partly them getting to know me, but what I'm trying to get to know is really what's motivating them right now so that I can kind of link their motivation to the goal and then let them loop. So, one engineer who's a brilliant engineer I hired from Intel, and he led an engineering team, and he wanted to get out of engineering and lead. And I needed to build what we call a best cost analytics team. So in the automotive market, when we quote the price of our product, our OEMs are so sophisticated, they know down to every component what that product should cost, and therefore they can determine if our price is right or wrong. And I thought, well, if that's who I'm selling to, why can't I do that to my suppliers? I'm going to copy, BMW's the best at this. I'm going to copy what BMW is doing. I'm going to build that capability for my supply chain. So I hired this engineer to do this. And in that case, he's like, but David, I'm a really good engineer, but I'm going to have to talk to the suppliers. I'm going to have to do all this, but I want to. So in this case, he was personally motivated to do it. And I said, okay, then we're going to learn. Step 1, I'm going to give you this space to do it, and we're going to hire some peers. But I want you to know that my goal is to put you in charge, but you got to prove to me this. So I gave him a goal. I helped him along. And then eventually the team was following him before I appointed him. So by the time I appointed him, nobody said, what the heck is this person doing in charge?
Yeah.
And then I did it again and again, and now he's a vice president, and he's leading a fairly big team. And we have, I think now 90% of our $4 billion spend under a cost model.
Wow.
Abram, another question?
Now, I have to say, I'm learning so much here, David. I really appreciate your willingness. I don't think you have incredible insights, but you're just so generous with the examples and working us through. When you think about training other leaders to develop, one of the things I'm so impressed with is the way that you think about developing other people. I would love to hear when you have somebody who it's their turn to start developing people, are there any pieces of wisdom you would share beyond what you've already discussed?
Yeah, so kind of like a product development, your observational feedback and the market research. So, when I'm developing leaders, they don't know this at the time, but I'll tell them, hey, I don't want to do a review where you're just presenting to me. It's important that your team's in there. Well, why? Because now I'm doing 2 things. One, I'm helping that leader lead. I'm getting an observation of who his problems are not, because you have bad apples. You have people who blame people just as an excuse when they're really the problem. But if you have that 1-over-1 philosophy, you're getting feedback constantly. Okay. And it's showing your willingness to be hands-on and non-hierarchical, but ultimately I'm doing it so I can give better feedback to the person. And then that feedback comes through questions. So I noticed, You know, Jose, for example, doesn't seem aligned to your goals. What are you doing about it? Oh, I'm so glad you asked. I'm struggling with that. You know, they might not have come to you and said, I'm struggling with Jose. But if you observe it, they're willing to admit that they need help. Or you might say, hey, I see a high potential in Joanne. What are we doing to develop her further? And are we willing to take a bet on her on a role now? Is she ready to, you know, for that next thing? Oh, I don't want to let go of her. You can't hold on. So that's one way I do it, observational. Anna.
Hello. I'm sorry that I was off, but I'm writing on my board, as you know. And when I write on my board, then people get distracted. But it's precisely what I wanted to do as a final question. So you spoke about a lot of things, and you speak that you are interested and you don't want to get bored. So the more, the merrier. You heard me about mushrooms and sponging everything. My last question would be, how do you pause, how do you reflect, and how do you synthesize all of this? Because you can see that this is my week and you were parts of my week. So I'm trying to synthesize everything that I got, but how do I now digest it so that my next week has this as the platform to start new things without us losing? And I'm saying this from the perspective of the students, that they have lots of things happening. Academic, life, now the flagship, the circuits, everything that it's coming. How do they put this together? Would you have any words for us on how to do a pause and reflect?
Yeah, I do. That's a great ending question. So, you know, again, a sports analogy. If you're going to do something new, you have to practice. And then with practice, it becomes a natural habit. It becomes an instinct. So, you know, I try to build habits when I'm doing something new. So one habit is, you know, whether it's Saturday morning or Sunday morning, before I get too far away from the day, that's my planning week. It's reflecting on the prior week, making sure my priorities for the new week still reflect what they need to be, so that I'm not working for the calendar, but the calendar's working for me, okay? So that's one habit. I'll call that short-term reflection, is just how do I take what's happening, and is my time allocation still reflective to the priorities in the current situation, or do I need to adapt the week before it gets out of control? And then there's what I'll call the long-term reflecting. And I have to admit, that's harder for me right now than it used to be. I used to use international flights for that. I used to love getting on a long flight and not having to look at email, not being connected, okay, before there was Wi-Fi in the air, not being connected, pulling out my little journal and kind of like, what did I learn? What's going on in this market? What does this mean long term? That was my reflection. It's hard if you're caught in the office or just looking at the screen 24/7 right now. I'm struggling with that, to be honest, in terms of how do I reflect when I don't have an international flight. So I got to build a new habit. But for a student, I think this weekly habit of, you know, it might only be, like I said, a cup of coffee, a 20-minute, but build the habit. Make it part of your routine.
Thank you, David. I think that's a really great place to end. I know also that you might want to comment, you know, as far as using their Iowa State education, what things, because you're one of the most engaged alums that I have ever worked with on our campus. What things should students be taking advantage of now?
The hands-on experiences, like this, okay? I mean, go beyond the classroom, but figure out which one relates to you. You know, if innovation's good, this is good. If building a car is good, Prism's good. If you need income, go co-op. But take advantage of hands-on experiments. And if you're a freshman in software, experiment on Mini. You know, so I did a lot of different things when I was in college because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a judge on the Interfraternity Council. I was a lobbyist for the government of the student body because I wasn't quite sure. Like, I knew I wanted to be an engineer, but I didn't want to only be an engineer. So take advantage of experimenting and exploring, and then ultimately, you know, those experiences, I think I'm motivated to give back because the Electric Power Research Center and the people I worked for, I stayed friends with. And last year, when the foundation recognized my wife and I for the Philanthropist of the Year, I was so privileged that Glenn was able to attend in his 90s right before he passed.
Oh.
So to have that ability to connect with the people that, you know, taught me there and do that was awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think you're even talking to our students. Some of our fellows are and our innovators are looking at graduating, and just that real importance of maintaining connection with the people who taught you and continuing to return. I think you've done that. You've set a model for that. And I think that's also an important innovator lesson. You know, continue to return to the people you taught, and also continue as a contributor to the place that taught you. And I think you're a great testament to that, David. I want to say thank you for your time today. This was really quite incredible in terms of the lessons and the formulas that you really gave us for our students. I will say also thank you, Anna. Thank you, Nakaya. Thank you, Abram. And especially Spencer, who really does a seamless job. We do post these online on our Student Innovation Center website. We have a flagship archive. We also have, for example, the product management session that David did last night with Andy is also online and recorded. So we have those options. And for next week, our innovator is Dr. Stacy Cole, who's superintendent of the Storm Lake Community School District. And you might ask, well, that seems like Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other, right? We have industry presidents, we have all these global people, and then we chose someone from Storm Lake, Iowa. Why did we do that? Innovation occurs in all areas, but Dr. Cole has a unique opportunity. She is operating in the most diverse district in Iowa. 90% of her district is economically, socially at a different level, and she has people who speak 34 languages in her high school and in her school district. So she's going to talk about how she deals with diversity, how she addresses diversity and inclusiveness, the challenges of that, especially in a COVID environment. And I think you'll find her story really fascinating as a local innovator. So hopefully we will see you next week. And as we always say, innovation for students, by students, with students, that's what we're about. And excited to be here. Thank you, David. Thank you, team.
Thank you so much, David. I learned so much today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right,
Absolutely.
go Cyclones. Big game tomorrow.
Yeah, go Cyclones.
Only
Bye, team.
David to finish with the sports comment. Good.
Yes. Bye, team.
Thank you. Have a lovely
Bye,
week.
thank you.
Bye-bye.